All right, hey guys. Looks like we're going to be going through as a continuation of this well-grounded Rubyist book review. We're going to go through chapters 9 through 11. So if you haven't started with us, or if you're just getting started, uh, we are doing the well-grounded Rubyist. It's a book. It's the newest version. It's got Ruby 2.1, and hopefully, if you're viewing this in a playlist on YouTube, you've either viewed the previous videos or you're going to. But yeah, so let's get started. I am Brian. I like to give my information up front because a lot of people have questions or interested in how I got to where I'm at. So I like to just throw that out there for you. That's my Twitter handle. My email will be at the end of the presentation, which this would actually be kind of quick. I actually thought this would have been a lot more information, which I try to kind of stick with the book and the information that's provided. But also have been trying to not give away as much information from the book, just to encourage people who haven't read the book to go ahead and just pick it up and support the author and support the Ruby community by purchasing the book. So how to read this book is a slide that I added in the second week. Just taking all the concepts. Most people who find Ruby newbies, the assumption is that they are newbies, or you're fairly new within the last 6 months to Ruby. My idea is to actually take in the concepts of the book. Don't try to completely understand every concept for the first read through, but actually come through a book, and any book that you actually approach in programming, and understand that you're probably going to be reading the book more than once. And if you have that sort of idea, you won't get stuck and hung up on one concept that you might not understand. But yeah, as far as especially some of the information we'll go through today, I might even breeze by it, but just understand that there's quite an information out there, including this book, to help you learn these concepts. So with that being said, let's start. I had thrown the slide in with it the first week, but we'll just review the concept of the book. We're actually not going to do any code. We're not going to break down anything. We're just going to review some examples that are in the book, and then some concepts, and then we'll move on to the next section. All right. So just starting off with Chapter 9. Chapter 9 was actually collection and container objects. So then the first question is, what are containers? Containers are arrays, hashes, ranges, and even sets, and they all hold things. And that's basically all you need to know about arrays, hashes, and ranges. We had mentioned in the first week object-oriented programming, that Ruby is very much an object-oriented programming language, and that's the main focus of the language. And if you understand that concept that everything's an object, then you'll understand these next couple chapters easily. So just thinking that arrays, hashes, and ranges and sets are all different types of containers that will hold information for you. But also keep in mind that there are a lot of methods built into the Ruby core that allows you to manipulate and view that data and access that data on a later. So that's the gist of collections and container objects. So I'm just going to go through each one of them, starting with hashes and arrays. This is actually in the order that the book shares them. So first I start with arrays and hashes, and I didn't want to spend too much time on arrays and all the messes that are built in, because the book does that for you. But I just wanted to mention, if you didn't know, those are arrays. If you see in my first example, the A equals 1, 2, 3. Arrays are separated in those. I guess they're the square brackets, I guess is what I hear they're called. And then below that you've got a hash, which I've just got a simple hash. There's more than one way to make a hash. You actually can use the curly brackets also. But for whatever reason, my example, I think the example from the book probably, I actually use hash.new, but you're also able to do that. And I didn't properly show my example for the array, but that's how you can actually set up the array. But you don't need to actually set the array, because A equals 1, 2, 3 is the same thing as what I just had. So just keep that in mind. So there's a lot of time spent in the book with the interactions of array and hashes, and so that's why I did not want to repeat it. But I did want to mention that the fetch methods is something pretty cool I actually just learned about in the last month as far as hashes. Rather than calling, as you could see, H and then calling the key A. So hashes are actually just like arrays, except they're separated by they've got you can have a key and a value. So if you think of how you log into any application, if you log into Twitter, as a Twitter profile, you've got a username, you've got your email, and you've got your password. Well, the keys to access your username, you can't access your password for obvious reasons. Or it's actually you can, but it's encrypted. But for your username, the key would be username, and for example, of my Twitter account, the actual data would actually be Brian Lamar, which would be my username. So if I were to call a dot, sorry, just trying to find where I can type. Just if I wanted to find my key like username, I would be able to then set that to Brian Lamar. Just like that. So just think of it like that. With usernames, passwords, a lot of things like city, state, and zip codes like addresses. So if I wanted to set my hash to the key of city, you can set it like that. And I guess this is kind of an easier way to, and you could actually even set, I live in Orlando, you even set it as a string, an integer, or whatnot. Hashes can hold all types of strings, integers, any types of values. That's the word I was looking for. So if I were to call, instead of, if I were to call h.city, I would get Orlando. But if I did h.fetch city, I would then return Orlando just as I would expect. But if I was actually trying to get state to the city, it would actually return an error for you. If I didn't call fetch and I actually just tried to call I understand I'm probably explaining more information than I wanted to, but I think it's a cool idea. So if I called h.city like that, it actually will just return nil. And there's a lot of cases where it kind of explains. Let me delete all this. So a lot of times there's a lot of errors when you return nil or false. So like if you're looking to actually check for errors, you would much rather use fetch and actually return an error. And there's more details in that in Confident Ruby, which I should probably, I'll actually add a note to put a link here for Confident Ruby. There's a good explanation about that in there. Link. All right. So actually, I put that link in the wrong section. Here we go. So yeah, I highly recommend that book. That's a pretty good book. I'm just about almost more than halfway through that book. Also, I'm kind of going through that with in another book club separate to this, but it's also not on the internet. So moving on, next section is ranges, and won't spend too much time on this, but I did want to point out that ranges are really arrays in disguise. So ranges, you've got the inclusive and the exclusive versions that you can actually set that way. There's also multiple ways to create ranges, which the book explains. I didn't really feel a need to explain a lot of this because if you go into Code Academy, they go into detail on this, and also the book does. So, but just note that the inclusive version of the 1.10 it prints just the same way. So just keep in mind that you could actually, if you have a range, you could treat it as an array and use all the same methods that are available to an array. Um, yeah, that's about it. I just wanted to point that out. And then moving on to sets, which is something that I've probably seen but never actually used. And I spent a lot of time reading on this and trying to figure out more information on why you would want to use a set. And the only reason I found that was explained in the book was that for a set, each value needs to be unique within the set. But internally, the basic functionality of the set is a hash. But I couldn't find any other more details. But I did have a link right there in the Ruby docs about sets. Ruby's also actually sets are actually not part of the Ruby core. Within the Ruby documentation, or sorry, not unique to the Ruby core, but within the Ruby documentation, there's more information on sets and how they're used. Also, the book has some information, but it only spends about a couple paragraphs on it. So I've never actually used a set or had a need to use a set in any project that I've been working on, but the book mentions it, so I guess to be well grounded in Ruby, they felt the need to mention that. So that is it on Chapter 9. Now we are in the Chapter 10, and like I said, this is actually going to go pretty quick because all these, well, these two chapters kind of really go hand in hand together. And yeah, you kind of need to know about containers to actually get into the next section. So, Enumerable and Enumerator. I guess enumerables assist in the handling of containers. What a coincidence, we just talked about that. So many of each method's variations are available, which I just copy and paste straight from the book. All the I think that's I guess that is all of the different variations of the methods within enumerable that you can actually use with each or without each. But yeah, just if you had a block of code or if you had a container that you needed to do some manipulation or checking with, those are the majority of the methods that you actually need to use, or actually all of them. I don't understand why I keep double talking myself, but yeah, those are all the methods for inside the enumerable. So yeah, so I have my example on the bottom. I've got an array and just using some, I think a callback from an array of 1 through 10 that was actually mentioned in the range. So I just kept going with that. So I had a variable that I did not set, but just take my word for it, that's an array of the numbers up to 10. And using this this block form, using the curly braces, I am going to find all the numbers that are greater than 5. And if you see, it outputs just those specific numbers. So using that find method, which is found above, I could find all the numbers greater than 5, which I think I just need to double check that is correct. Actually, that is not correct. It actually is find all. So the actual output would actually just be number 6 by itself. But what I did, and I did check this, I didn't update the actual presentation. It actually is find all. That would actually find all the numbers. Just find will just find the next number, the first number. But yeah, that is your methods, and that's basically, in a nutshell, you kind of the example of what you can do with containers and how you can process them. More examples are in the book, but I don't want to get into too much detail and go down the rabbit hole of all the examples. Again, I just wanted to kind of explain what's in the book to kind of get people excited into reading it or just talking about it. But for the meantime, I think with the time actually being different, normally I do this a lot earlier, or I do it on a weekend. But due to the holiday, I had to do it later at night. What's last notice for people? But regardless, all the videos are available after the fact. So moving on. Oh yeah, so we have more examples here. Enumerables can be used in all types of containers, including hashes and ranges, not just arrays. So I had some examples from the book using hashes and Yeah, it looks like actually that is an array, and that is also an array. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that you could also do it on hashes and arrays, which I did not have an example for, but take my word for it. Yeah, and also with the whole showing the method of, I don't have the array of states, but taking my word for it that there's an example in the book. They show that the include method, checking to see if Louisiana's in that state's collection. It comes back true, and it also even matches for abbreviations, and it's using a little bit of regex, which we actually will get into the next chapter. But that's it. Obviously, nobody on. There's no questions. So I will just move on. Enumerable is actually a pretty good library to read. I've actually had plans on going through in detail on the off weeks. We actually go into more details of reading actual code and doing some examples live. So you're more than welcome to join me next week. Actually, it'll be next weekend. But I realized that the book goes in more detail on Enumerable, so I actually avoided doing Enumerables. But it might be a good example to do in the future, but I'll get some feedback on that. Here's actually an example with hashes, each with index. I actually return the index number. So with an array, so obviously it starts with 0 to whatever number of indexes that you have, or indices, I think is plural. And that's another way to use in each method a combination and enumerate through a container. So that's just an example right there, and it's just adding the president's names and using the index plus 1. If you see on that looks like the fifth line. These lines aren't numbered, but it's using a string interpolation, which actually I think is part of the regex, maybe, or no, I don't think so. Maybe we'll be speaking. I think they mentioned it in the regex book, but yeah, don't quote me on that. So yeah, it uses that, and then I do have a typo, and where was I at? Oh yeah, just showing that example. It's very simplistic. I did put in a little note. There's other some methods that you could use: cycle and inject. Inject's but using the sum. If you look into how sum works, the method for summing numbers, it injects the plus sign in there, which actually is a method in itself. But yeah, there's other things to note that you can use. Also, I wanted to point out that the ampersand, so if you use names.map, and you can take each name and upcase it, so rather than using a block, how you can see with each with index, you see do, and then you've got the two objects that they're passing in, the index and the president name. You could actually, if you're just doing something simple as upcasing each value, you could actually pass in that block using, rather than using the do or the curly braces, you can actually use the ampersand and call the uppercase method, which is passed in as a symbol. Yeah, there's more notes on that. You're more than welcome to research that. I don't think the book actually explains it, but I did some research on that prior, actually, something totally unrelated. And thought that was pretty cool. One note is that it actually will slow down some speed in the processing of the application if you're processing the ampersand block that way. I think someone has noticed that, actually quite a few people have noticed that there's a slowdown in your application if you have a very large list of presidents' names or names in general, or whatever you're using that shortcut on. So that's something to keep in mind. I think the thing I actually used it on was a list of not many objects, so I ended up using it in my code. And with that being said, moving on to the next section. So this is the last section, actually limited to only, I don't apologize, I actually didn't put any chapter numbers in the notes, but I limited only to 3 chapters because I felt like these 3 chapters really went well together, and I felt like there would actually be more information to talk about. I know these 3 subjects are stuff that people usually have questions on, but if you do have questions, feel free to ask me. and I'll get you an answer, or I'm sure people in the Ruby newbie community actually will be able to help you out too, if you just post a question in there. Yeah. So where are we at? Yeah, regex. So regular expressions, it's not something just to associate with just Ruby. It's actually across programming in general. But Ruby has that available, just like any other programming language. You can send messages to a regular expression. The regular expression can add something to the Ruby landscape, just as objects, they also fit nicely into the landscape. I don't remember, I guess I did not finish that thought. I know that came partially from the book, but I did not finish that thought, so I apologize on that. But regex is, they can add to the Ruby landscape, I guess, is where that was going at. So there are some special characters, which you can see below, that kind of help with the regex and building the regular expression. If you think of regular expressions as this a built-out block of code that's actually most likely written in one line, but you can do quite a few different things, which I actually just snipped a bit of that from the book, which you can see it's obviously in the book format. I didn't explain every single one of the special characters, but I did provide a link below that actually explains all of those characters above in that little line. But yeah, with the caret, the up caret, beginning, it is marks the beginning of the line. So the matches start at the beginning of the line, and then obviously going down the line. $sign will be to represent starting from the end of the line, and then so on and so on. We've got the end of the string, the beginning of the string. Word boundary is something I've never actually used before or even seen, but then again, most regexes that I come across actually do copy or find examples that are built out. For example, devise is a gem for Rails. They have a regex to regex emails, which I actually used recently to match emails because I had to do some email validation. So I just used the built-in devise regex that was already built and maintained. With regexes in emails, actually, the way emails historically have gone, back in the day, they used to only be the .coms, but now it's kind of expanded where you can have an email that could end in .ninja potentially. So you have to update your regex to make sure that you aren't just looking for 3 characters or just looking for coms, nets, and orgs. So you can actually look for .me's, .ios, and all that other stuff. So regex is something that could possibly be deprecated in the future. So this is some extra note that I'm just mentioning that's not really pertinent to maybe what you're doing, but maybe it is. So I mentioned it. Also mentioned in the book is you got the match method technique, which I should identify that as a match method, and then you've got the comparative operator, which is actually the equal sign. And what is that? It's the accent symbol I've seen in the Spanish characters. So I think the enye. I don't know. The squiggly line. So equal and squiggly line techniques. So, and I've got 2 examples of that where you can use matching regexes. So this just a note there that came from the book, but also wanted to mention that there is a great talk on regexes from a Ruby conference about 2 years ago, maybe 2013, I believe. Actually local to me, Ancient City Ruby, not local, about an hour and a half north of me, which I did attend, but it's not that one, that actual conference that year. But yeah, there's a link for that. I highly recommend watching that if you have interest in learning more in regexes, if the book didn't go in enough detail. But finally, just going over more regexes and the methods that are available to you. If you didn't know, the split method is actually uses regexes to split by space. Yeah. Well, I guess if you called split, it will split by each letter, but you could actually pass in. So if you want to split by comma, or if you want to split by space, you just put a space between there. But I guess with the blanket, it splits everything. So It's also scans, another one. It's another regex method, which I have used in the past, but it will scan for for that example, it's scanning by digit, so it's only pulling out the digits, which is good, and then putting it into an array for you. So it's kind of got a little map functionality built into there. And then there's also gsub and sub. And sub, the difference between those, it looks like sub actually will replace the first matching instance. As far as gsub, it actually will work on each. It'll work on every single instance. So, like with you can see that capitalizes the first vowel, and it leaves for sub. I'm talking about it leaves the rest of the vowels alone. But if you see for the gsub, it looks like it's actually doing the regex for, and I forgot there was a line. So /b is a word boundary, so it matches the word and its boundaries. So it looks like with that regex, it's a /b, so it does the word boundary, and it does for the word. So checking the words and its boundaries. So I guess if there was stars and stuff around the words or parentheses, it would also take an account to that. But yeah, so it's actually capitalizing every single word. That's what I'm getting at. For within gsub, that's just something that I haven't really used much. I know when I pair program with some people, they've always used gsub or thrown that in there. I do pair programming every other week at a meetup, and gsub's been used, but I don't ever think to pull it out of my tool of tricks, but now I know. And I know the difference between that and sub. So now we're on to the conclusion, which how improper of me not to have a capital there. But so Ruby basically makes it logically, it makes sense. And by reading this book, a book like this, it helps to better understand Ruby and its capabilities, which is the whole goal of going through this. The idea is to read the well-grounded Rubyist, and you'll be well-grounded. I actually met an individual, actually read this book multiple times, and he is amazing at what he does. So my goal is to hopefully read this once through with you guys and read it multiple times in the future. If I get bored, I'll read another book, but until then, I'll just keep reading this book. But with that being said, we are not at the end yet. We've got one more week of this, and the cadence has been every 2 weeks. So in the next 2 weeks, we'll actually be covering the last 4 chapters of the entire book, which, if you did Ruby Newbies with me, with the ODIB project, we're going to cover file and IO once again. But there's 3 new subjects which kind of get breezed over, because like this book, it shoves it at the end, and that so be it. But it looks like this book actually spends a lot more time than I have spent with callbacks and hooks and runnable objects. I'm not even sure what's in there. And object individualization. Definitely all 3 topics that I have not spent much time in. So I think I might have more notes on that, just because it's going to be more of an epiphany for me and more of a realization of what you can actually do with Ruby and those things. Actually, I have used callbacks in Rails, but hopefully I'll have a better understanding by the end of that. So that is it. Got through those 3 chapters, and looking forward to doing the next 12, 13, 14, 15, 4 chapters. Yeah, they're right there in front of me. Just wanted to mention that last week we looked into Rails, and we looked at, was it Rails models? I think it was last week. So we're actually looking at, it's not active views, it's into the Rails library, but it's actually action views. And it's gonna be a lot of stumbling around, playing around with some fake app, and checking out to see how ERB works and how Rails basically compiles HTML out of using ERB tags. I just took a brief look into what Action View actually does, but there's some Action View helpers and stuff that we're just going to look into. It looks like some XML stuff. But basically, just if you look in the other videos, we just basically read through and try to make sense of what Rails is by reading the Ruby code. that is it. That will be next weekend. Look for an invite for that if you're a part of the group, if you follow me on Google+. Or if not, send me an email and I will get you in the right direction. I should also mention that there is Ruby Newbies, which I guess I did a poor job of explaining what that is, but it's just my way of learning Ruby at a pace that I can learn it and also share it with others. So feel free to check out that site. It's very simple. It's just a simple Rails app that I have plans to do more stuff, but at the point at now, it's actually just yeah, simple Rails app that hopefully I can build out into something bigger. Yeah, I post a lot of the links to the videos. I post links to all the associated Ruby Newbies groups and also the Odin project, so check them out too. So that's the link. And that is it for the video. I thank you for watching and bearing with me, and hopefully we can see you live in the last one in 2 weeks. Thanks.